Hello, everyone. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you to a fireside chat on the exciting world of cryptocurrencies. Joining me today is Akant Sitara, and Akant is one of the foremost experts on the field of cryptocurrencies and crypto security. I've been a long-time follower of Akant's content on first Quora and now LinkedIn, and I think his insights and enthusiasm for the sector are just amazing. So, just a bit about his profile. He's an alumnus of IIT Madras and Indian School of Business, Hyderabad. Currently, he works in the business strategy team at TRM Labs. So, TRM Labs is a crypto security firm which is securing the financial system for billions of people across the world. Thanks, Akant, for taking time out on this Sunday evening and hosting this illuminating session with us.
Thank you so much, Vikram. Thank you so much for the amazing introduction that you gave. I would love to talk about anything that there is about crypto. Would love to answer questions that the folks have. Just a bit of more introduction about myself from the crypto perspective.
Right.
So after graduating from IIT Madras in 2013, way back, I joined the Government of India with the Ministry of Home Affairs in this organization called the Intelligence Bureau. So the work of the Intelligence Bureau is to collect intel, try to catch hold of criminals, etc. And I was posted as an assistant central intelligence officer. There, I worked for like around 3 to 4 years in the Delhi cyber cells. In the cyber cell, we used to perform, dark web monitoring, social media analysis, monitoring, etc., lawful interception, etc.
Right.
So that is where I got in touch with Bitcoin, with blockchain for the first time, 5, 6, 7 years ago. Since then, I've been trying to catch hold of criminals who use cryptocurrencies in illicit activities for nefarious reasons. So, and I've tried to learn as much as possible on the blockchain and the crypto world, and it's been a good journey so far. Once I started reading more on that, I decided to get back to the private sector. So I joined the Indian School of Business to do an MBA. Currently, I lead the business strategy team of TRM Labs. It's a blockchain analytics company based out of San Francisco, USA. We'll talk more about it in the coming presentation and the chat that we'll have. Thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure to me. I thank all the audience for being here on a Sunday evening listening to this talk. That actually shows the amount of interest crypto itself is increasing. Thank you so much, Vikram.
Right. Thanks, Akant, for elaborating on that introduction and taking us through your journey of how you got introduced to the world of cryptocurrencies. I'll just talk about the structure of this session. I'll quickly run the audience through a quick PPT that I had made on the basics of cryptocurrency. That should take about 10 minutes. Then we'll open the floor for questions. So I'm expecting those, if people have questions around the basics of cryptocurrency and crypto security, they can put them in there. And then after maybe 20 minutes, we can move on to the more advanced aspects of crypto security, the kind of work you do, and what are the trends in crypto security. Right. So let me start by sharing my screen. Okay, is my screen visible to everyone? Okay, cool. Right. So before we talk about cryptocurrency, I want to take a moment to talk about what currency is. So we all are familiar with currency, rupee, dollar, euro. All these are currencies, and their primary goal is to be used as a medium of exchange. So there is a buyer and a seller, and when they have to, say, transact on a product or service, that's when currency comes into picture. Now, the important part here is both the buyer and seller must agree on the value of that currency. And why would they agree on that value? Because that currency is backed by a central bank. So if you look at the rupee note that you have, you'll see that it has the signature of the RBI governor. And this is what lends the currency its value. And if that note does not have the RBI signature, your currency note is just a piece of paper. Another important point to note here is that both the supply and authenticity of a currency is also controlled by central bank. So it can't be the case that we are just recklessly printing money notes, which would increase supply and lead to hyperinflation. So that is why the supply and both the authenticity is carefully controlled by the Reserve Bank. So to recap, there are three main aspects about currency which we should remember while we start discussing cryptocurrencies. First is its medium of exchange, whose value is guaranteed by a central bank. Next is the central bank controls the supply. And last is it can also control the demand through its monetary policy. So what are cryptocurrencies now? So cryptocurrencies are digital currencies which are designed to be used as a medium of exchange by helping make the peer-to-peer payments online. And by their very nature, they are borderless, which makes them a very valuable medium of exchange. What are some examples of cryptocurrencies? So Bitcoin was the first cryptocurrency, and it's probably the most popular as well. All other cryptocurrencies are referred to as altcoins, and some examples are Ethereum, Tether, Dogecoin. Another important point to note here is why is the word crypto fixed to all these digital currencies? The crypto word is prefixed because all these currencies use cryptographic techniques to secure all the transactions that are happening, to maintain record of ownership and the transfer of ownership, and lastly, to control the addition of new cryptos in the system. The defining feature of cryptos, which separates them from currencies, is that they are decentralized, which means that there is no central authority which is issuing these currencies. And how does this implement decentralization happen in practice? So all of you are familiar with the popular term called blockchain. So blockchain is the decentralized distributed ledger system, which helps implementation of this technology in practice. So the fact that cryptos are not monitored by any central financial institution would raise some very important questions. First is who would be controlling its supply? Next would be who or what guarantees the value? And last would be what do we do to ensure that crypto is genuine and not a fake? Because if any of these things fail, then it would put the entire cryptocurrency system at risk. To understand the answers to those questions, I would like to talk about a few technology concepts which underlie cryptocurrencies. First is the validity of each coin in the cryptocurrency is provided by a blockchain. So blockchain is nothing but a growing list of records which are linked using cryptography. And you can think of these records as containing history of all the transactions that are happening on the system. The fact that blockchain is decentralized makes it impossible to alter them retroactively. So this means that you can't go back in time and alter any transaction, which makes the system very robust and secure. How is this decentralization implemented in practice? So this is done through the millions of nodes which we have. So a node is nothing but a computer system that is connected to the cryptocurrency network. A node can have multiple functions. It could be used for hosting a blockchain. It could be used for validating transactions, or it could be used for relaying transactions. Next important concept, which is quite popular among people as well, is mining. So mining is popularly understood as the concept of generating new cryptocurrencies. But what exactly do you need to generate those coins? So mining refers to the computations through which transactions are validated and verified to ensure that no counterfeit or fraud transactions are happening on the system. And the nodes which I talked about previously, so those nodes do the job of mining. And mining basically involves solving a cryptographic problem to validate these transactions. A number of mining nodes might compete to solve the same cryptographic problem at the same time. And the node which solves that problem first is able to validate that transaction, and it adds the block to the blockchain. And this information is then broadcast to all other nodes. Now the mining node which was able to validate this transaction gets rewarded, and that is how new cryptocurrencies are added to the system. So there is no other way cryptocurrencies can be added to the system, and this addition is also at a predetermined rate, which is defined by that cryptocurrencies protocol. And that is how we control the supply of cryptocurrencies in the system. So this is a rough architecture diagram of how a cryptocurrency transaction would happen. So suppose A and B are two peers who want to conduct a transaction. Cryptographic keys would be assigned to the transaction. A new block would be created. That block is validated by the mining nodes. And once the validation is done, it is added to the public blockchain and it's stored there forever. And that's how the transaction is completed. What are crypto exchanges? So in general, we are familiar with the concept of stock exchange. So any exchange can be seen as a marketplace which helps buyers and sellers of financial instruments to conduct their business. So similarly, crypto exchange is a marketplace which will allow traders to buy and sell cryptocurrencies. In addition, some crypto exchanges could also allow you to exchange your cryptocurrencies for other assets. And these assets are usually the conventional fiat money, which refers to the currencies which are printed by the central bank, for example, dollar. And Coinbase and Binance are currently the most popular crypto exchanges. So one fundamental question, I think, which is there in every person's mind is, why is the price of cryptocurrencies rising so much? So if you look at the graph of cryptocurrencies, then over the last 1 year, there has been a massive fluctuation in their prices. And this is a question which will probably arise in every enthusiast, as well as a person who's not enthusiastic about them, as to what is the underlying reason for causing such a high price rise. So there could be multiple reasons why the price of any asset rises. Basic economics states that when demand exceeds the supply, that is when price rise happens. It happens with every asset, whether it is a financial asset or a physical asset. So let me draw a parallel here. Let's take the example of a financial asset such as a stock. So the price of a stock could generally rise due to multiple reasons. There are good reasons for that, and there are bad reasons. What are the good reasons? People have fundamental belief in the growth of that sector, or they have faith in the strategic initiatives taken by that company, and they feel it would lead to long-term growth of that company. On the flip side, there are some bad reasons as well. Sometimes the prices rise purely based on speculation and hype, where people are not investing per se in the future prospect of the company. They just think that, oh, others are investing, so let me also invest. So that is a bad reason. Similarly, I think the price of cryptocurrency, we can't attribute it to just one factor. That again is rising because of multiple factors. The good reasons for the price rise in cryptocurrencies is that more and more people are developing faith in cryptos. So as more international payments happen in cryptocurrencies, it will get a boost as an alternative medium of exchange. Second is there is an improved access to cryptocurrency trading. Both in India and abroad, there are a lot of crypto exchanges that have come up, which makes it very easy for retail investors like us to start doing cryptocurrency trading. Next is institutional adoption. So institutional adoption means when companies and financial institutions or even countries start accepting cryptocurrencies as a mode of payment, that would actually lead to increase in its adoption, which again fuels the price rise. Keeping all these good reasons aside, there is again a bad reason as well, which is the rise of speculative traders. Speculative traders exist in every financial market. So they are buying cryptos not because of a fundamental belief in its long-term value, but because they are looking to make a quick buck, which fuels the massive price rise and leads to a lot of instabilities as well. So here I'll give a personal opinion, which Akan probably might differ with. So I feel at the moment, the price is maybe too high. And that is purely happening because a lot of speculative trading is happening. And a lot of people, at least the friends in my circle who are investing in cryptocurrencies, their goal is that, okay, let me invest, say 2 lakhs in this currency, and there is a chance it could become 10 times in the next few months. And they are not really concerned with the adoption of cryptos or its long-term implication on the financial system. They feel that there are some factors, some invisible forces which are causing the price to rise, and that is what is making the cryptocurrencies the price to rise, and they see it as an opportunity to make a quick buck. So that was the initial introduction on cryptocurrencies from me. We'll open the floor to questions now. And then, Akan, I think you can take over and share your thoughts as well.
Absolutely. That was a very succinct way of introducing crypto to the community, about talking all the aspects in a very nice manner. Beautiful work, Vikram. I see a few questions already. Do we go there one by one, or do we invite
Yes,
people to?
we'll go there one by one.
Sure.
Let me just flash the question.
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe this is quite similar to the content of the presentation. Mm-hmm. So we have a question from Neha on how do you calculate or predict the movement of cryptocurrencies? or is it even possible?
A beautiful question, Neha, for which all of us would want answers to. That is a really good question. If we can say that, okay, this is one crypto, one stock that I'm sure that I will get 100% of returns, everybody is going to invest in the same stock or crypto, and then it might not happen. The prediction itself will ensure that the prediction might not happen.
Right.
But that being said, there are a few fundamentals, there are a few learnings from economics itself that you can apply to understand, as Vikram said, that about the supply demand economics of each crypto. Read the white papers of what exactly that particular crypto is supposed to do, such as the Ethereum's use case is much different from Bitcoin's use case. Dogecoin's use case is much different from, say, Cardano's use case. So once we know what that particular cryptocurrency or digital asset or virtual asset wants to do in the real world, the price will depend on that. If more and more people believe that, yes, Ethereum's programmable blockchain can actually disrupt the financial sector, then I see that the token being used in the Ethereum blockchain, the Ether, might increase its price because the demand will increase. So there are a lot of layers on the price calculation, that there's no one formula to it. You need to understand what the economic activity is, what political activity is, how regulations, laws, compliance work into that. So yeah, it is not as simple as just prediction or calculation. You need to make a guesswork. It's a guesstimate based on your knowledge, your belief, and your inference of where the market is going. But again, I myself don't involve in giving investment advice, or I myself don't focus on the price angle. I am more focused on the technology perspective. I'm more focused on the security aspect of cryptocurrencies.
Right. Thanks, Akant.
Sure,
I
Vikram.
think we have Aditya also. He has got many questions. So let us just invite him to the stage and
Sure.
maybe understand more on the questions. So I think this question, okay, we'll let Aditya take over.
Yeah, thank you, Vikram. Thank you, Akant.
Hey,
So,
Aditya.
I think this is something that Vikram touched upon in his presentation as well. That right now, mining is the only way to add more crypto coins into the system. That's how you generate more coins in it. Uh, of course, we have seen what has happened in China quite recently in terms of a lot of mining centers being shut down, and that causing a huge skew in the supply demand curve, and again that having an inadvertent effect on the price of these cryptos. So are we maybe potentially looking at some other entry points for generation of coins in the future apart from just the transaction based mining coins entry right now?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. Again, to answer your question, it depends on the use case behind it. Bitcoin is important because of its capped supply. So the mining is much more important in Bitcoin. Whereas Ethereum's use case does not care about how many Ether are there, it does not care about who's mining. Ethereum's use case is more on smart contract compatibility. How do we build programs on the blockchain? So if there are a billion Ether or 10 billion or 100 billion Ether, the use case really does not matter. In Bitcoin's case, mining is the only viable way to mine all the coins till we reach the 21 million supply cap. Or in other cases as well, if you want to mine more of Dogecoin or mine more of Ethereum, mining is the only way. To answer your second question about China's action on banning mining, about how they ensure that no mining activity happens in the jurisdiction, a little bit on more about the decentralized approach that really does not affect the uptime of the Bitcoin network. It does not affect how the Bitcoin network runs. If there are a million miners with a million nodes, the Bitcoin network will work in the same way as there are, say, 10 nodes or 10 miners. That being said, the news, of course, will affect the price. The news saying that China is trying to ban mining will affect the price in the short term, but it does not really affect the technology. It does not affect the work, because end of the day, the Bitcoin protocol is programmed in such a way that every 10 minutes there has to be a block to be added. There has to be some 6.25 currently Bitcoin which will be given out. If it is 100,000 miners, the complexity of solving that problem will be much tougher. If it's just 10 miners, the complexity will be simpler, but the 10-minute block adoption will keep continuing. So it does not matter what China does, it does not matter what US does, it does not matter what Europe does, it does not really matter what the governments do. The Bitcoin engine will keep running. If it's 1 million miners, it'll be tougher to add a new block. There'll be higher transaction fees. If there are a few miners, it'll be easier to add a block, lower transaction fees. So not many people realize this, that when you reduce the mining pool activity, the transaction fee also decreases because adding the block becomes easier. So the price is depending on what people feel, what people's beliefs are. That is not mathematical. That is not programmable. That is not, rational in my approach. I hope that answers your question.
It certainly does. Thank you so much.
So I have a follow-up question on that, Akant.
Sure, Vikram.
When the number of miners they decrease, you talked about from say 100,000 to just 1,000 miners. How does that affect the security of the cryptocurrency system? Does more nodes mean a more secure system because more nodes are validating the transaction?
There's a distinction here. A miner is different from a node. A node has just a copy of the entire blockchain, and they keep it as a store. They ensure that the blockchain does not disappear. Whereas a miner, what they do is they validate these transactions. They add to the block, in return earn cryptocurrency. So a node, the more the nodes, the more decentralized the network would be. And yes, of course, if there are more nodes, attacking the Bitcoin network will be much difficult, because you need a 51% support to attack the Bitcoin node. Whereas the number of miners might not really have any kind of impact. If there are 100,000 miners, all of them would compete to solve that particular algorithm to get the Bitcoin. If more and more people compete, the processing power will be used much more. So it'll be like the one who has the most processing power will get to add the Bitcoin block, the next block, and earn Bitcoin. So the more the number of miners, the more the processing power, that will automatically increase the transaction fee. So the most ideal world will be more nodes which have nothing to do with mining, which don't take any processing power. I can open a node on my laptop, on my phone. That is not a problem. The lesser the number of miners, the more the number of nodes is the most ideal situation, which is almost the case right now. So 50 years down the line, most of the Bitcoin will be mined. The miners would not care about mining anymore. The processing power will not be there, but the nodes will keep on running, and the Bitcoin blockchain will keep on running around. I hope that makes sense.
Yes. So I have a number of questions, but I'll give others as well a chance.
Sure.
Thanks, Aditya. Thank you for the question. I'll call you again towards the end when we cover the concept from Akant's presentation.
Sure. Awesome. Thank you so much.
We have Adarsh as well. Let me bring him on stage.
Yeah.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, hey, Adarsh, yes, you are.
Hi, Akant. Let me first start with it's a pleasure to be here and hear from you. So I have a follow-up question on what Aditya and Vikram proceeded. So my question is, basis what you said, if the number of miners are increasing, they are competing for the same transaction and the processing power is equivalently going up. So that means it is sort of becoming anti to what we hoped for, right? Like we wanted, when the Bitcoin adoption is more, transactions, more and more miners are there. So it is a massive adoption. It should lead to decrease in transactory costs. So my question is, there was a news recently, correct me if I am wrong, and pardon me for my ignorance as well. Vitalik, who is the co-founder of Ethereum, he had said that there is a way to sort of change this heavy dependence on transactory power and processing costs in the near future, not 50 years down the line. So could you shed some light basis your wisdom? Thanks.
Beautiful question, Adarsh. To answer your second question first, the actual thing that he said was that on the Bitcoin blockchain, adding more and more transactions would be slow. It won't be energy efficient, and you need miners to keep adding that. What he meant was adding a layer 2 solution on top of that. So if there's a Bitcoin blockchain, add another layer where most of the transactions would be settled. It's called a Lightning Network. After this, just Google for Lightning Network Bitcoin. It is a beautiful concept where most of the transactions will be settled off chain, and maybe once an hour or once a day, the settled transactions will be printed on the blockchain. So that way, the number of transactions will be at least like 50x or 70x. It does not depend on the blockchain's efficiency. There'll be lesser number of final transactions, and the blockchain will be much cleaner. It'll be much more efficient. Just to give an example, if Akhand is taking 5 rupees from Vikram, and then I'm giving Adarsh 5 rupees, and Adarsh is giving somebody else 5 rupees, it is 4 transactions. So currently what's happening is that on the Bitcoin blockchain, you're recording all the 4 transactions.
Yeah.
But if there is a layer 2 network, it'll be like 1, 2, 3, 4. All these 4 transactions will be settled on the layer 2. At the end of the day, they will just upload one transaction saying that, okay, others send somebody else 5 rupees and remove 5 rupees from Akhand. So end of the day, the efficiency of the blockchain increased 4x. The number of transactions will be much faster, and it's almost the Lightning Network is being launched on various nodes on the blockchain, which is what he meant by a few years down the line. And that's a beautiful concept, of course.
And it's very feasible, of course, right? I mean, it's
Yeah,
not
of
a
course.
concept stage. Okay.
It's like it'll be as simple as using PhonePe or Paytm or anything, but much faster, decentralized, lower transaction fees, and it's not in anybody's hands. So yes,
Wow.
thank you for that question, Adarsh. Yeah.
Thanks, Akhand. Thanks for the clarification.
Does that affect the security as well? Because this layer 2, will it be validated through the same mechanisms, or will the validation of the transactions also change?
So the security of the blockchain is sacrosanct. That you cannot replicate in layer 2. In layer 2, it's just like a limbo stage where all the transactions are settled off chain. The security depends on how the Lightning Network is built. There are a few problems with that, as you rightly pointed out. Maybe the transactions might go haywire, but it's a work in progress. It'll take a few
Right.
years to actually build in the cybersecurity issues. So imagine a PhonePe kind of a PhonePe or Paytm or Google Pay kind of app that you will have, which will do most of this off chain. So it'll
Got
take
it.
some time. Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Akhand. Thanks, Adarsh, for that wonderful question.
Thank you, Vikram.
Akhand, we have questions from Bharat and Ankush as well.
Sure.
But I think what we'll do is we'll quickly cover your presentation, and then we'll come back to questions from Ankush and Bharat.
Absolutely. I see a few questions over there which will be covered in the presentation. So yeah,
Right.
we'll let me just share my screen. Is it visible to you, Vikram?
Yes.
Okay, great. Cool. So yeah, beautiful set of questions, guys. But I want to focus on a few of the security aspects of cryptocurrencies, because the topic of today's panel itself is cryptocurrency and securities, and how the law enforcement agencies look at it, how regulators look at it, how central banks are looking at it, and what kind of illegal activities are happening, and how the crypto industry itself can grow despite of all this. So TRM Labs is a blockchain analytics company. We are into cryptocurrency-based investigations, monitoring, regulations, risk management, etc. We've been helping law enforcement agencies across the world to understand what crypto are, to investigate crypto-based crimes, different kinds of crimes, etc. And we want to ensure that nothing illegal happens in the industry, because the industry itself is in a very nascent stage. And we want to ensure that if there is no illegal activity which happens in the ecosystem, then the adoption will be much faster. Institutional adoption, Reserve Bank adoption, or the law enforcement adoption. And finally, people adoption will be much faster when they trust that nothing illegal is happening. So that is our mission that we work with. We want to prevent all kinds of financial crimes, frauds, which happen over cryptocurrency. We want to build a safer financial system for billions of people, because if not now, 5 years, 10 years down the line, many people will use some form of crypto-based virtual asset, digital currencies, etc. And we want to ensure that we are ready for that particular field. We want to build an infrastructure to ensure that that happens. So as you know that the entire cryptocurrency domain started less than 12, 13 years ago. 2008, the Bitcoin white paper was published by this anonymous person called Satoshi Nakamoto, who talked about a peer-to-peer, decentralized, open ledger-based, mechanism-based cash that solved a few of double spending, Byzantine generals problems, etc. All that you can read up offline. We're not, the focus of this presentation is not into get into basics of crypto, which can be learned. So some of the applications that were in his mind at that time and in the starting was that Bitcoin will be seen as something which has value, which is a store of value similar to what gold is, but in the completely digital form. It will be used for payments. It will be used as a payment gateway. It will be used to buy goods, sell services, whatnot. It will be used as a medium of exchange. And also in the last 5-6 years, something called decentralized finance is about to come up, which are basically peer-to-peer transactions. How does a bank work? A bank takes in deposits, gives out loans, and the delta in the interest rate is what their entire business model is. A decentralized finance want to ensure that that delta of interest rates is almost reduced. And that delta, that small difference, is a $1 trillion industry. So basically, if I send money to Vikram via a bank, if I send 10 rupees, he will get 9.5, 9.6, whatever, depending on the loans, deposits, interest rates. But on decentralized finance, you just need to pay the small fee that the blockchain itself would need to run. And then you can perform most of the financial based activities. So there were a few applications, but for the law enforcement agencies, for regulators, for central banks, the on ramp and off ramp becomes very, 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 very important. What do I mean by on ramp and off ramp? An on ramp is somewhere where we convert real world currency into virtual world currency. Real world fiat currency such as USD, rupees, etc., is converted to cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc., at a certain places, such as an exchange. Vikram said talked about exchanges, saying that they're similar to stock exchanges, which I completely agree with. A stock market converts your cash into shares, ownership of companies. In the same way, a crypto exchange converts fiat into a crypto. This is like the midpoint between a real world entity and a virtual world activity. So this becomes very important for law enforcement agencies to see where the money is entering and where the money is exiting. So the on ramp and off ramp become very important. And it's not just exchanges. There are hundreds of different varieties. We have ATMs, where you go to an ATM, showcase your QR code, you get Bitcoin in return, you put in fiat currency. So that is another on-ramp and an off-ramp. Payment applications, PayPal, Visa, MasterCard, etc. They are using crypto as well for performing performing the payments. Retailers such as Tesla, Nike have started accepting crypto. There are a few online games where you can earn this money, where your fiat currency is converted to crypto. I'm repeating this because this becomes very important for law enforcement agencies to see where the crypto world is ending and where the physical world is starting. That is where you tend to catch these people. And why is that important? Because the number of users are continuously growing. There's just a Bitcoin ATM growth in the world. In India and Bangalore, Mumbai, Delhi, a few Bitcoin ATMs are about to be set up in the next 2 to 3 months. We also see the growth of users is rapidly increasing. So in the red line, it shows the crypto users growth. How did they grow when the internet had started? Sorry, the internet user growth. For example, in 1990s, this is how the graph was. And in the blue line, we see the crypto users as well. People have access to internet, people have access to mobile phones, people have access to disposable income. So we are seeing a faster crypto-based user growth as well. This becomes important because there are both good actors and bad actors. 99% of us would be good actors, but that 1% bad actors are the ones who will screw up the system. Currently, there are 1.5 crores of Indians who are exposed to crypto in some way by indulging themselves in either investing or owning, hodling, whatever. But we see a lot of illegal activity as well, and we want to stop that. The governments, the law enforcement agencies, the regulators, the central banks, most of these intergovernmental organizations, such as the Financial Action Task Force, the United Nations, all of them are focused on the illegal activities. The idea is not to stifle the growth of crypto industry. The idea is to ensure that nothing illegal, no illicit activity happens, so that the industry will grow faster. The first and foremost thing that we see is something called money laundering. And in the last 5, 6, 7 years, almost $10 billion worth of black money was converted to white money using cryptocurrency. And this is a number that we know of. That we don't know of will be at least 5x, 10x of this. The point I'm trying to make here is, till now in the real world, money laundering used to be very, very tedious. If I had to launder my, say, 1 crore of black money into white money, I either used to go through the Hawala route, or maybe go to Cayman Islands, set up a shell company, a fake company, and then convert my black money, show them as profits, then come as white money. In the crypto world, all that is all that is unnecessary. I can just convert my fiat currency into cryptocurrency by using some KYC on the exchange, and then put it in a anonymous Bitcoin address, and maybe later I can just withdraw. The worst part is that it's a virtual currency, it's a programmable money. That means you can write algorithms, you can code programs to perform this money laundering much faster. So if I have 1 crore of rupees, to launder that money, it will take 3 to 4 months to 6 months. But if I have 1 crore worth of Bitcoin, to launder that, it'll take 15 minutes to me if I just write a simple script saying that, okay, open this 100 Bitcoin addresses, do this 1,000 transactions, crisscross all the transactions, and then you exit out through some exchange in, say, South Korea. It has become so easy. That is an important issue that we need to focus on. But that is not everything. Money laundering is one aspect. The bigger aspect is terrorist financing. In this image, we see that in Syria, this Al Qaeda based Mujahideen terrorist organization says that to give us financial aids, send me money to this particular Bitcoin address. Anybody sitting across anywhere in the world who is just using their own nodes, or who's just using their cryptocurrency exchange, who are sympathetic towards such causes, will just look at this Bitcoin address, send them some Bitcoin. They will convert that Bitcoin into weapons, drugs, whatever. So funding terrorist activity is a huge security issue that people are focusing on, that the law enforcement agencies, police agencies are focusing on, and this is because this is a huge issue as well. Not just that, this is a dark web screenshot that I have. It is on the Onion browser. So to access the dark web, you need to use this Tor browser, the Onion router browser, where the dark web, you can use it to go to a marketplace which can sell you drugs, which can sell you weapons, AK-47, or you can buy child pornography, child sexual abuse material. A lot of illegal, disgusting activities happen on the dark web. In this particular case, they say that on this particular dark web, you can buy all these drugs, sugar wax, terp sauce, live resin, names for maybe cocaine or heroin, at $40 per gram, etc. It's just that you pay through Bitcoin. You send money to this particular address, and then we will courier the stuff to you. So the point is, since I'm not using USD, since I'm not using INR, I'm not using my credit card, debit card, it becomes tough. It becomes tough for law enforcement agencies to stop these kind of activities. And this dark web-based drug trafficking is extremely common in European countries. There was a Netflix movie also made out of it. It's becoming very, very common, and the more cryptocurrencies are used for these kind of illegal activities, the tougher it is for normal people like us, you and I, to invest in it, to see it as a viable option for stocks market, or as a viable option for as an investment asset class. And not just that, we also see identity frauds. Some hacker will just steal your identity. They will steal your passport, Aadhaar card, your email ID, bank account details, etc. And they say that if you want to get back your details, send money to this particular address. The transactions, the address is anonymous. The transactions are tough to identify. It's tough. The tracing becomes a bit tough. The idea is that not just identity frauds, even ransomware, somebody might kidnap a minister's daughter. They will say that if you want your daughter to get back, you send me 5 Bitcoin to this Bitcoin address. The point I'm trying to make is that a lot of illegal activities are happening, and it is our duty to ensure that we don't we don't deal ensure that we don't deal ourselves into these kind of illegal activities. Sometimes the cryptocurrency which you're handling 5 hops as in 5 transactions ago, could have been used in drugs, could have been used for terrorism, could have been used for any illegal activities. And these are just a few illegal purposes. For example, credit card fraud. This is also on the dark web. Somebody steals credit card details of random users, and they will say that if you pay me in Bitcoin, I will give you this credit card details, and you can use it to perform your whatever transactions that you have in mind. So again, just to reiterate, any crime, any security issue is a financial crime. If I'm murdering someone, there is a motive. Most of it is financial. If I'm kidnapping, if I'm doing a hack, if I'm doing a scam, if I'm scamming people, if I'm trying to steal money, everything is a financial crime. And every financial crime can be done better on cryptocurrencies because of the anonymity, because of the decentralized nature, because of non-control of governments. But there is a white light, because tracing cryptocurrency is very, very easy. As Vikram pointed out, all the cryptocurrencies are based on the blockchain technology. Blockchain is a chain of blocks. It's a chain of blocks of transactions. So every transaction that has ever been performed is available for anybody to see, anybody to access. It's an open, decentralized ledger. A ledger is like an account book. Every transaction is there for anybody to see. For example, this particular person has sent some money at 12:16. So the timestamp is there, how much money they have sent, what money is there in each address. Everything is open for everybody to see. Now, this has a huge advantage. All the activities, all the illegal activities that I've told till now can be performed on cash as well. If I have a 100 rupee note, I can give it to somebody and they will never be able to trace it back to me. So the 100 rupee note that you have in your pocket you will not know who used it before you, or who used it 10 times before you, or who used it 100 things before you. In cryptocurrencies, you can do that. In cryptocurrencies, right from the Genesis block, right from 12 years ago when the first Bitcoin was mined, till today, you can trace all the transactions, you can actually trace the entire flow of funds. You can see the source till the destination, because the blockchain technology has been built in such a way. This is what was amazing to me, because illegal activities have always been happening on this world. If I give 1,000 rupees to somebody, they will go and murder somebody. That 1,000 rupees can never be traced back to me. That is how black money also works. But if I give 1,000 Bitcoin to somebody to go murder somebody, that 1,000 Bitcoin can be traced back to me. The only issue is that the addresses are still anonymous. The Bitcoin addresses are, how do I put it, are alphanumeric. They are anonymous. So what happens is, it's like this particular address has sent money to this other address. I don't know who these addresses are, but I know what transactions have been performed, what activity has been performed, etc. So just to give you a small case study on this, just to discuss about what exactly happened, how the Silk Road case study was actually solved. I might be boring you guys here, so I'll just give you a small case study over here. So Silk Road was one of the largest marketplaces on the dark web. It was similar to your Amazon, it was similar to your Flipkart, etc., where only illegal drugs, illegal activities, it was anything illegal that you wanted to be done or to be done, you used to go to Silk Road. I'm talking way before, in 2013-14. So here, if you want to buy a hit of LSD, it was 0.58 Bitcoin, 1/8 ounce of cannabis, 2 Bitcoin, etc. This was in 2013-14. But the Silk Road users didn't know that Bitcoin was traceable. It had newly come 2009, 2010. Bitcoin was started. they started using it as illegal activities on illegal purposes. I think there was one of the questions from Adarsh as well about this kind of illegal activities. So what the FBI in the US did in 2013 was they did a joint operation. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Homeland Security Investigations Department, IRS, CID, Drug Enforcement Administration, all these agencies came together. They did a joint operation. They knew that cryptocurrency was based on blockchain technology and all the blockchain is traceable. It was new at that time. Most of the people didn't know how it used to be performed. The Silk Road was traced, the Bitcoin transactions were traced, the final wallet provider was traced, and by doing a small operation, they were able to seize that entire website. The point I'm trying to make is best summed up by Katie Horn, who was the prosecutor for that particular case way back in 2013-14. She says this beautiful statement: the government was able to use that same technology to actually track down criminal activity it might not otherwise have been able to. Before 2013-14, people used to use USD, INR, or what other fiat currencies. They used to give cash. All this drug-related activities used to happen. But ever since Bitcoin was used, without the technology underlying Bitcoin, we never would have been able to catch these people. Governments actually caught illicit actors by using the same technology that the illegal actors themselves were using. That is the beauty of the blockchain industry. So one of the questions here asked is what TRNS, what do you guys do? So at TRNS, what we do is, first and foremost, we try to analyze all the public blockchain data, get as much, all the public blockchain data is open, it's decentralized, it's everybody has access to it. And most of the raw data looks like this. It's all alphanumeric, it's all gibberish. It just says that from this address to this address, so much Bitcoin was sent. So we try to analyze the data and then we de-anonymize these particular addresses. We try to link them with real world entities. How is that? It is out of the scope of this particular conversation. It is just that we try to de-anonymize them. We try to link the addresses to real world entities. There are a few ways to do that. We perform all those ways. And then what happens is, for example, just to give an example of an open source way that we do, this Bitcoin address, we for sure know belongs to Syria, Mujahideen, Al-Qaeda members. So what we do is we tag it, we label it, we give some kind of attribution. Say that, okay, that address belongs to Al-Sadaqah, Syria, Al-Qaeda under the category of terrorist financing. And what happens is that since all the transactions are traceable, any amount which comes out of this Bitcoin address or any amount which goes into this Bitcoin address is either seen as a high risk deposit or a high risk withdrawal. So then we try to de-anonymize the entire blockchain space. We try to see which is legal, which is illegal, and then we try to catch hold of these particular people. So we just from an open source perspective, we get data from the United States governments, we get data from all kinds of governments, any blacklisted addresses there are, any kinds of illegal addresses from the dark web, from different kinds of, we try to build a blacklisted database saying that tomorrow, if say WazirX or CoinDCX gets funds from these entities, you can stop the funds right there. You will not let those funds get into India, so that maybe you and I, Ankush, Vikram and I, Bharat, everybody can use clean crypto-based currencies. So we try to perform this analytics to ensure that nothing illegal enters the space. So we follow the money across all the blockchains to ensure that nothing illegal happens. And we detect the suspicious patterns, suspicious behaviors. There are a variety of ways, variety of signatures, etc., that we try to detect. And we try to we're building infrastructure to ensure that nothing illegal happens. But the bad actors are always, they're trying to do real novel ways of performing their illegal activities. Just for your sake, some of the cases that we've seen are, one is chain hopping. Say if I have $100 with me, illegal money, I convert that $100 to Bitcoin address. Then from Bitcoin, I convert to Ethereum. From Ethereum, I convert to say Litecoin, then convert to Zcash, then I exit. So a lot of bad actors are doing this chain hopping activity, which is somewhat serious. privacy-based technology coins such as Monero, Zcash, etc. People are using, where they can mask the transactions, they can mask the addresses, use ring signatures to perform their privacy-based transactions. As I told you, they're also using algorithms, coding, program money laundering behavior, terrorist financing behavior. So these are a few traditional varieties that we are seeing. The point of this conversation is for us to be aware of such kind of thing. One more thing that we're seeing is something called nested entities. Just to give you a small example, imagine I am opening a exchange. So I have my backend infrastructure ready, which is the blockchain. In the front end, I open a website. I call it, say, Change Now. And here I will do all my KYC. I will take details of bank accounts. I will take details of Aadhaar card, passport. I will do everything perfectly well. So here, my front end and that back end infrastructure that I have, I connected. Everything is clean. But you know what a chameleon is? A chameleon keeps changing its color. In the same way, what I do is I will open another front end called, say, Simple Swap. In this front end, there is no KYC done. There is no, anybody can register their own, whatever it is. Here you can perform darknet based transactions. Here you can perform terrorist financing, money laundering, etc. But this is also settled on the same backend infrastructure. So if I am a law enforcement agency, I look at the backend infrastructure that shows that it is connected to Change Now. This completely is hidden. So we're seeing a lot of these kind of chameleon shops where, just to give you a smaller example, this is Unit Cash, one exchange, a Russian exchange, CoinDrop, second, Xcenter, third, Catbit, fourth, P2P Garant, five. 5 different front ends were using the same backend infrastructure, out of which only one was regulated, one was legal, one was licensed under the government authorities, so that you know that nothing illegal happens. The rest of the 4 were used to perform their own, to perform all kinds of illegal transactions. So when a regulator is looking at the backend infrastructure, looking at the blockchain itself, I don't see anything illegal. But when I look at it from the front end, everything is illegal. So these kind of things you just need to remember when you're accessing, when you're trying to trade cryptocurrencies, when you're trying to buy cryptocurrencies. This particular P2P Garant, it's a Russian website. A lot of Russian investors get duped because this is not registered anywhere. So in the same way, it's better to invest in those cryptocurrency exchanges where you know are registered, are proper, they're using proper analytics tools, that you know that the crypto that you're getting is clean. Now, this is chameleon shop. I just want to talk about a bit on parasite shops as well. I'll just give a small example for this, for you guys to understand. Imagine there is Binance, a good regulated firm, everything is legal, KYC needs to be done. I open an account on Binance, I use my KYC, I use my Aadhaar card, everything is fine, everything is good. But what I will do is, I will then start a new front end. I will use a website, say akhansitrakcrypto.com. There, I won't do any KYC. I will let all the darknet, all the illegal activities happen. All that comes into my my transaction. I will do all this. At the end of the day, I will settle all these transactions on the Binance blockchain. So I am acting like a parasite where I'm using the backend of Binance to perform my illegal activities. I'll take transaction fees from these fellows. But if any regulator looks at the blockchain activity, they will see that Binance's blockchain activity is dealing with the dark web transactions. I am safe because the law enforcement agencies will not attack me. They will attack Binance because that is regulated. So that is like a parasite entity that you need to be aware of. Sometimes this also happens. So just to reiterate, to talk about what exactly is happening right now in the current financial world. In the financial intelligence world today, you have lots of financial institutions like banks, like insurance providers, lots of different kinds of financial institutions where they perform all the financial activity. If something illegal happens, they file an SAR, a suspicious activity report, or a STR, suspicious transaction report, to the government regulators, maybe SEBI or RBI or whatever. So anything illegal, the banks usually used to raise an alert and send it to the RBI or the SEBI. But now what's happening is that in the crypto world, there is no bank. Everything is decentralized. The exchanges are just exchanging your money. They're not actually controlling anything. So the regulators directly have to look at the entire blockchain space to analyze where illegal activity is happening, where illegal activity is not happening, etc. And this is the current financial intelligence in the crypto world today. This becomes easier for RBI to actually see what kinds of activity is happening across the space to ensure that no illegal activity happens. The same with the US Fed as well. Everybody wants to ensure that nothing illegal, no illicit activity happens so that the industry itself grows. So that was a small presentation that I thought I would want to talk about the various activities that are happening from a security point of view. Yeah, if we have, I see that we have a few minutes, maybe 20, 30 minutes left. We can get into the discussion about questions from a security point of view, from a technology perspective.
Thanks, Akant, for that wonderful presentation. It felt like I was reading a mystery novel being narrated by a very good author. The way you talked about all the illicit activities that are happening or that can happen, and the way you guys are working to resolve those aspects. And I think that the more we work towards security, the more the adoption will also be better, because the people will be convinced that, yeah, their money is safe and this is here to stay. Because the biggest fear is, what if the entire crypto system collapses someday? Then what happens to our coins? So I think that was a fantastic presentation. I'll call Bharat on stage. So Bharat had a number of questions, and maybe we can take them one by one. So I think Bharat is no longer there in the event. But yeah, maybe we can start with this question first.
Absolutely. The question is, at TRM Labs, are you guys building a graph of transactions to better query on the transaction happen? Yes. So what we're doing is a variety of activities. We build a database of whitelist addresses, blacklist addresses, and graphs. Of course, there's a graphical user interface which the crypto exchanges use to actually trace the entire flow of funds to see where the funds are going. And if some illegal transaction comes into the ecosystem, they will stop it right there. Before sending money to an illicit address, they pre-screen it. So we have these tools that the exchanges use to ensure any money which is incoming, any money which is outgoing, and all the money in the crypto, in the ecosystem itself, is all clean. Nothing illegal happens. Yes.
Got it. So the next question is also from Bharat.
I see a lot of over-enthusiastic optimism for DeFi. Do you think there is another bubble which is coming up? So just to talk about the decentralized finance thing. So decentralized finance is not one company, one person, or one individual who's doing everything to do some kind of bubbles or some kind of scams. Decentralized finance is the same concept which has been there for generations. Banking. What is banking? Just to reiterate, banks take deposits from users at, say, and give them 4% or 3%, 5% interest rate, and then they will lend the same money to people who want loans and charge 7%, 8% with them. That 8% that people they take from the people who take loans from the borrowers, and that 4% that they give out to the lenders, that 8% minus 4% delta is where their entire profitability, their entire operations are. They'll need to set up bank branches. They have to set up across the country. They have to build infrastructure. They have to pay their employees. They have to make some profit, 1%, 2% profit on that. Everything happens in that 4% gap. The point of decentralized finance is removing that middleman. So what is a bank? A bank is a middleman between a lender and a depositor. So if Vikram has 100 rupees extra that he wants to deposit and earn interest, and Akhand wants 100 rupees to perform my own investment or my own business activities, I need not go to a bank. I will directly take it from Vikram. I will take 100 rupees from Vikram. I will get money, he will get interest. Maybe I will pay him 6% interest, not 4%, not 8%. So in a decentralized finance module, you are removing the middleman so that it's much more efficient. You just need a platform which connects the lenders and the borrowers. Vikram has 100 rupees extra to lend, but he does not know who the borrowers are. Akhand needs 100 rupees to borrow and perform their activities, but I don't know who's lending. A bank used to perform that activity, and that banking activity itself is $1 trillion activity. A trillion, I'm saying it's a very small number. It's not trillion, it's like multiples of trillions. You're basically saving those trillions of dollars. Vikram will get a higher interest rate. I will get a lower interest rate while I lend. I will get 6%, he will get 6%, whereas I used to take it at 8% and he used to get only 4%. So here the users are getting benefited because of decentralized finance and not some middleman. How did, say, Kotak Mahindra, how did ICICI, how did ING Vysya become such huge behemoths? By taking, by getting profits from you and I. So we want to ensure that. So the concept of decentralized finance has never been a bubble. Now, how do we ensure that we implement this decentralized finance? Depends on the blockchain, depends on the security aspect of it, depends on the trust factor, depends on the cryptocurrency belief that we have. That is a different concept as altogether. In there, some cryptos might be a bubble, some cryptos might be a scam. In a similar way that some banks could be, just a Ponzi scheme. Some banks could be just a multi-level marketing scheme. So yes, it does not matter if I'm using one crypto or the other or another. What matters is a concept, and decentralized finance is here to stay for the benefit of the users. I hope that answers the question.
Right. So I have a follow-up question on this. The another role that a bank plays is it will identify the credit worthiness of a person and then decide whether to lend him or not. In case of decentralized finance, where we are directly connecting lenders with buyers, don't we still need the platform or some player which can at least check the credit history of that person and then make an informed decision? Because otherwise my risk for losing all that money I've deposited becomes very high.
Absolutely, beautiful question. And that is what these programmable smart contract based blockchains do. So you get into a smart contract. To get into the smart contract, I, as a lender, will need to pay a small fee. So for me, some money is involved. And for you, you will also get into smart contract and you will get some fee from the blockchain. To answer your credit worthiness, credit history as well, there might be third party vendors who will also get some kind of fee, who will do all that for you. So the business model is not concrete yet, of course. The business model is they keep on changing, they keep on increasing. So different varieties, such as one of the users says, collateralization, credit worthiness, credit history behavior, all those are business models which keep on adding to make the entire system better. But the concept itself is novel, and it is here to stay. Ankush says that Teller.finance is solving the problem to bring collateralization ratio, which is a good thing. And these kind of innovations will keep happening. Today, if not I or if not you, somebody will solve that particular problem. So the idea is there. Getting that idea to get implemented will take a few years, a couple of years. It's already been done by these companies such as Aave, Compound, etc. There might be a better business model so that the lenders are much more secure about their own money.
Got it. So we have a comment here from Ronak. I've just shown it on stage, where he talks. I think you mentioned in passing about smart contracts. So he has talked about what we can do with smart contracts, and maybe if you want to shed some light on this aspect as well.
Absolutely. So just to give you a brief, I'll just go on a tangent here. 20, 30 years ago, people didn't know the power of programming. People didn't know the power of coding, say C,
Right.
C++, Java, whatever. With the program, you can basically do anything. You just need to put in the logic, you just need to put in the code, you just need to have some kind of rational rules. Using coding, currently, I can order food if I want. I can talk on this online webinar sitting in my house. I can perform thousands of different activities. I can, work, I can send emails, I can watch movies, whatever. The coding capability, if it comes to a blockchain, the blockchain is decentralized. So what a smart contract does is a smart contract is basically a program which binds two people into a contract. So it's programmable. With a blockchain, you will eliminate the middleman. When you eliminate the middleman, you're saving on transaction charges, you're saving on censorship, You're saving on a lot of other activities. Tomorrow, if I go to a bank, I will say, I'm Akhand, I want some money. The bank can refuse you for thousands of different reasons. The bank manager say this, can say that I don't like your face, so I won't give you the loan. So that's like they have the power to censor me. But on a decentralized finance, if I just pay my transaction fee on Ethereum, no matter who I am, no matter what my race is, what my color is, what my region is, what my caste is, what my creed is, you will still be able to get that amount of money. So you're basically changing the middleman's power in the entire equation. So blockchain, when I say decentralization, is just not a fancy word. There is a lot of power in these middlemen. What does a central bank do? A central bank has complete monopoly, a complete power on the entire financial system of the entire country, of what all the people can do, where the people can buy, what they can use to buy. That is a very powerful concept. So we want to decentralize that. Also, not just imagine, if not in the financial world, imagine an Uber. What does an Uber do? Uber connects drivers to users. If somebody wants a car to travel, they will go to Uber website. They will use the driver. Now, Uber has the authority to reject a driver. Uber has the authority to reject a user. Now, imagine a decentralized application built on Ethereum based on smart contracts, where you are directly connected to a driver without a middleman, without Uber. So blockchains, there was a very famous quotation: Uber disrupted the driver technology. Blockchains will disrupt Uber itself. So the power will come back to the drivers and to the users. If there's a decentralized application, say D-Uber, where I get all the activities on the same way, it's hosted on the blockchain, everybody has access to it. You will get a car ride for a cheaper rate because Uber takes its own profit out of it. The drivers will get a higher percentage because there is no middleman to take their profits. So the driver is happy, you are happy, the decentralized blockchain is happy because you pay some transaction fee. So all in all, everybody wins by removing the middleman. So that is how the smart contracts programmability will disrupt every industry which has middlemen, every industry which has intermediaries. It could be logistics, the, how do I put this, the e-commerce, the retail activities, the drivers, the Zomatos, the Swiggies of the world. As Lalit rightfully says, today drivers ratings are not portable. It's Uber's proprietary knowledge. So it's like Uber says that I myself know what the rating of the driver is. In a decentralized platform, all that is, everybody has, it's a common knowledge for that. That's a beautiful concept. Blockchain is here to stay. Cryptocurrencies are just one aspect of blockchain. I'm amazed at the power of blockchain to actually disrupt every single industry that there is.
Got
I
it.
hope that makes sense. Yeah.
Definitely. I think really illuminating. I think we can close with some questions posted by Ankush. So I'll just show it
Sure.
on stage.
Sure.
So a lot of, I think, yeah, you can go ahead and read it.
A lot of institutions like MicroStrategy or companies like Walmart, Apple have plans for holding Bitcoin. What event will legitimize holding cryptocurrencies? Ankush, the way I see it, it's not one event. There won't be one watershed moment in history to do that. It'll be a small, slow approach. Today, a few people use it. Tomorrow, a few retailers use it. Then institutions, one by one, they will come. Then governments will come. Then the nations will come. And we've seen that. Starting in 2009, 2010, it was these nerds, geeks in the cryptography space who are always on the internet, who are just using these cryptocurrencies for the first time just for the fun of it. That was stage one. Stage two happened when the exchanges came and people started looking at it as an asset class, where I want to invest in cryptocurrency because if I buy it today at $10, tomorrow I will be able to sell it at $20 and I will make that $10 profit. That is second approach, where retailers use cryptocurrencies as a way to increase their fiat wealth. Then come these institutions such as MicroStrategy, these first movers, Teslas, etc., who actually understand these broader economic theories, and then they start buying crypto. Then comes the institutional investors, such as the Morgan Stanleys, the Goldman Sachs, the large companies who will actually invest on behalf of investors from an institutional perspective. Me buying cryptocurrency is way different than a mutual fund buying cryptocurrencies using, say, retirement pension funds. That is the next stage, which we are already seeing right now. Then will come the payments gateways. Lot more people will start accepting Bitcoin or whatever cryptocurrency as payments. Then the nations themselves will come. El Salvador has legalized Bitcoin to be used as a medium of exchange. More countries will do it. Venezuela, Nigeria, they see 10,000% of inflation rates. They see their own currency devaluing very, very fast. They have no investments in their country. All the people in that country are suffering of poverty, of all this. So when they legalize Bitcoin, some kind of Bitcoin enthusiasts might get into that. Bitcoin fundings can get into the country. People will get jobs. If say tomorrow I want to start a cryptocurrency exchange or some kind of cryptocurrency based business model, I'll go to El Salvador because of the political soundness or in that particular space. So they'll get jobs, economy will run. Countries first, the smaller countries, the weak countries will start accepting it, and slowly slowly roll. It'll become much faster, and then the medium countries will start accepting it because the other countries are accepting it, and then the large rich countries will start accepting it because tomorrow, if say that Iran, or not Iran, say Egypt wants to buy petrol from, or wants to buy some tech thing from US, and they only have Bitcoin to spend. US will of course say that, okay, give me the Bitcoin, whatever you are, and I'll give you my tech. So that's how the slowly adoption keeps on increasing. It's a step-by-step approach. It's a multi-decade approach. It'll take 2 decades, 3 decades to actually become truly, mainstream. I hope that answers the question.
Yes. So in this context, there is another comment by Aditya as well. So we see a lot of speculative trading happening because of Elon Musk's tweets. They are influencing the market. So does this raise question on the future of decentralized currency itself? Because if one individual's tweet could affect such a price on a currency, then is it really a viable option for people?
Yeah, beautiful question. For that, we need to zoom out a bit. Right now, we are very, very early. It's been what, 10 years since the invention actually happened. Before that, there was no such thing. It took 3 to 4 years to actually understand that. Even right now, less than 0.01% of the entire world's population understand this. So when you look, there was a beautiful graph which showcases technology adoption. I'll share to you guys after this session, where the telephone itself took some 50, 60, 70 years for people to adopt. The internet took 30, 40 years for everybody to adopt. In the same way, changing an entire currency network, which is controlled by governments, which they don't, which the monopoly of the financial system gives them the power to perform the other activities, they will not let go of it very fast. So this kind of speculative trading, this kind of volatility will be there in the initial stages. But once the more and more people start accepting it, once more and more people start adopting it, the stability will keep reducing. It is like this sinusoidal graph with reducing amplitude. It'll be like when it started, the amplitude will be very high. Then slowly, once it's reduced, the volatility will keep reducing, and then it'll become stable. For that, a couple of decades needs to go. 2050, we can talk back. Nobody will have any question in accepting payments and any kind of crypto. That is what the world we see at here.
So we have a dissenting opinion from one of our viewers. So I'll just flash it on stage, and maybe
Absolutely.
then we can discuss a bit more about it. So
Sure.
Abhinav says that cryptos will never be accepted by governments, and this is probably going to end in a big bubble. So in this context, maybe you can talk about why El Salvador, how does it benefit from accepting Bitcoin? Like, why shouldn't we say it is just a publicity stunt which they are doing?
Absolutely. That's a good question. To be honest, El Salvador's use case might not be the right one, because El Salvador's use case is completely different. They are a small company, they're a small country, it's crime ridden, very small population, poverty is high. They have no incoming investments. The company, there's no employment there. For them, adoption of Bitcoin, as you said, was a bit of a marketing strategy to ensure that investments come into the space. If I am El Salvador and I say that, okay, Bitcoin is also legal, when I don't have a legal currency of my own, I'm still using USD. El Salvador does not have its own currency, legal currency. For them, it is like if I accept Bitcoin, maybe 10, 50 Bitcoin based companies or blockchain based companies will come into my country in the capital. They will set up their companies, maybe give employment to 100, 200 people, 300, 500 families will be beneficial. So it's like an economic point of view. As Aditya said, Venezuela perhaps. For Venezuela, it's a different use case where, as he rightly pointed out, inflation, or rather hyperinflation, is a huge problem for them. Today, in India, 100 rupees is worth, say, 100 rupees today. Next year, this time, say there's 7% inflation, it'll be 93 rupees. So my value of the currency itself is decreasing rapidly. For Venezuela, it's much faster. So for them, the volatility of Bitcoin is much more stable than the volatility of their own currency itself. And as a country, I will not be able to accept USD as my country's, national currency. I will not accept yuan. I will not accept yen or INR. I will accept a currency which nobody controls, say Bitcoin. So Venezuela adopting Bitcoin is to beat inflation, hyperinflation. El Salvador accepting Bitcoin or legalizing Bitcoin is for their own economic growth. India accepting Bitcoin on top of rupee would be, say, to increase flexibility, to showcase the country itself as innovation friendly, etc. So there are a variety of ways. Can you show me the question? I haven't actually answered his question yet. Can you show me the question that he...
The question, yeah, sure. I'll just flash it on stage.
Yeah, please. Correct. Now, to answer this question, from an investment perspective, from a trading perspective, there will be booms, recessions, inflation control, all that will be there. It is like saying that, say there's a company such as Google. Now I use Google for my search needs, for my email needs, for my pace, for my meeting, for calendar, for doing a lot of activities. Now there are so many use cases of Google, but all of us are talking about Google's market price. It's like, I don't care what users I have with Google. I care only that Google share price today is $1,000. Tomorrow is $1,005. It's $800. It does not matter if Google's share price is $1,000 or $10 or $5. Google's use case are still viable. They're still useful. I will still use Google for my search needs, for my Gmail needs, irrespective of what the share price is. Crypto, people are focusing on what the share price of cryptocurrency is and not focusing on what use cases cryptocurrencies will solve. As I told you, a decentralized blockchain has thousands of use cases to be solved. So yeah, I don't really talk in the investment perspective, from a trading perspective. No matter what the cycles are, the use case, that is why I told you, read the white papers or read what the use case of that particular, what problem that particular crypto wants to solve. Then the price would not really matter. 10 years ago, $100, people were very happy because it grew from $10 to $100. There was a 10x growth. Today, $30,000. 3 months ago, $60,000. 10 years down the line, $100,000 or $5,000. It does not matter, is what I wanted to say.
Right. So would it be safe to say that right now, dollar is the dominant currency in the current financial system? Would it be safe to say that countries which are affected by this financial system or want to or are not, don't want to accept the hegemony of dollar as the dominant financial system, they are the ones who will first rise against the dollar and try to adopt Bitcoin as an official currency or as an acceptable means of payment?
Absolutely. Perfect. Beautiful questions. So usually when you look at the history of money itself, when you zoom out and look at the last 1,000 years, the dominant currency changed every 70, 80, 100 years. First, it was Portugal, which had its own currency, I'm forgetting what the name, which was used worldwide. Then came Italian currency, then the florin was there, Indian rupee was there sometime. Then the British pound. Till 1800s, the British pound was used everywhere. In India, the pounds were used, the sterlings were used. In the last 100 years, from 1920s, since the World War One, when the European governments became much powerless, and the US started increasing its power. From 1920s, from 1940s, the hegemony of US dollar started increasing because they were not affected by the World War One, World War Two as much as the other countries. So in the last 70, 80 years, you see and because of some issues with the Bretton Woods Agreement, I'm not going into the exact details right here. The hegemony of the dollar increasing in the last 100 years, and as you know, every 100 years the hegemony is targeted. Right now, China's yuan is increasing,
Right.
Japan's yen is increasing, euro came up. Euro, what the European countries did was they all got together and then they built an euro. It's not pound sterling, it's not franc, it's not German something, it's a euro. So it's like every country has their own powerful currency that they want to make. As you rightly pointed out, there will be countries who don't want to be under the sphere of influence of the US, for whom using the US dollar is like giving up their own supremacy, giving up their own how do I put it, what's the right
Sovereignty.
word, sovereignty. Yeah, that's the right word. So it's like, and China is rising rapidly. If I am a country such as say Nepal and I see USD, I see yuan, I see rupee, I want to have my own individuality, my own freedom. I will adopt a cryptocurrency which nobody owns. So in this duality, till now it was USA versus USSR, the Russia versus US Anglo was there, but now and for next 10, 20 years, it'll be China versus US. If you don't want to be stuck in this Cold War, in this dichotomy, most of these independent countries will start adopting cryptocurrencies. The first one would be Switzerland, because there's this crypto valley in Switzerland already, which has almost 900,000 blockchain based companies. And Switzerland has always been independent. And when there is this currency war, which will come, China is aggressively focusing on their digital yuan. US dollar has had their hegemony for the last 70, 80 years. When these two immense, massive superpowers will start fighting against each other, the smaller countries will say that we don't want you, we'll use a blockchain-based cryptocurrency. It might not be Bitcoin, it might not be Ethereum, it could be some coin that they will build, but it will be a decentralized, non-governmental, open source, open blockchain-based cryptocurrency, which I don't know.
Got it. I think we'll just close it with one last question from
Sure.
Lalit, which is taxation a big concern in cryptocurrencies? And maybe that fuels crime or that leads to lesser adoption.
So a few thoughts here. If you are buying cryptocurrencies through an exchange, the exchange have to connect your bank account to your crypto account. So your bank account is already monitored by RBI, government, etc. So they will know when you're buying crypto, etc. So there, the taxation you'll need to say use capital gains tax if you're just investing, or if you're getting paid in salaries, you need to use your income tax and pay the cryptocurrencies. All that is fine. But what if I'm hosting a Bitcoin node myself, and my Bitcoin address is not anywhere, no government will ever know about it, and I'm getting some Bitcoin from different countries or whatever? Then the taxation issue will be a problem. So to answer your question, the taxation perspective will depend on you. If you want to say that if you want to file your ITR, income tax returns, or if you want to pay your taxes, you'll need to announce that, yes, you have been paid so and so Bitcoin, and I'm paying the income tax or the capital gains tax. If the person does not want to do it, it's up to them. It's like hoarding black money. A lot of real estate, construction, builders, etc., they have these huge amounts of cash that they don't disclose. So it'll be similar to that. It will be illegal from a law perspective, but as of now, there's no law for cryptocurrencies. So it's not even illegal, it's just unethical. So yeah.
Got it. I think we'll close the session here. Thanks a lot, Akhand, for that wonderful discussion. Going by the comments in the chat, I think, and the questions as well, I think the audience really had a lot of fun. And personally for me as well, it was very intellectually stimulating. The way we started from basics, we moved on to security, and then we moved on to some geopolitics as well. So I think it's always wonderful when you cover so much ground in a single session. And I think everyone who joined the session, they also will go back and read up a lot more about cryptocurrencies. And hopefully, like India's already started doing innovations. Say crypto exchanges are there from India, but maybe we can start with even more innovations from our end and make a name for ourselves as well in the cryptocurrency space.
Absolutely.
Right. Thank you to the audience as well. The audience has been really fantastic. Akan, do you have, say, 10-15 minutes more? We can sit on one of the tables, and if people are interested, they can come and join us. And just
Absolutely.
say hi.
Yeah. Also, Vikram, thank you for organizing this amazing session. It's been 90 minutes since we've been discussing, and the time just flew. I didn't know where the time was. The industry itself is very exciting.
Right.
It's at a very nascent level, and we're always looking for more and more talent in this industry to bring the industry forward. So yeah, I thank all the audience who have joined us on a Sunday evening, and it's been amazing. Thank you for organizing the session. I hope it's been useful for all of us. Yes, we shall go to one of the tables and then maybe discuss this in a very informal way. Thank you, guys.
Great.
Thank you again, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your time. If anyone's interested, you can join us on table 1. Thank you.